A Pair of Schoolgirls by Angela Brazil. Chapter 11. Alison's Uncle. Not very long after the events narrated in the last chapter, Alison entered the train one morning in quite a state of excitement, and could scarcely wait to greet Dorothy before she began to pour out her news. Mother had a letter yesterday by the afternoon post. It was from Uncle David, and he's actually on his way home to England. He's not going back to India at all, he wants to settle down near Letchworth. He'll get here before Easter, and he's coming straight to stay with us. Isn't it lovely? Are you fond of him? Inquired Dorothy. Oh, he's just ripping. He's so jolly, you know, always having jokes and fun with me. He's the only uncle I possess, so of course I make the most of him, but he's as good as a dozen. And I don't possess even one, thought Dorothy. Have you any cousins? She added aloud. Only seconds and thirds once removed. They are so distant, I can scarcely count them as relations. My one first cousin died when she was a baby, and Aunt Madeleine died too, out in India, so poor Uncle David has been alone ever since. But he's always fearfully busy, he goes about superintending railways and building bridges. He has a whole army of coolies under him sometimes, and they have to take the lines through jungles where there are tigers, and snakes, and things. He writes us the most tremendously interesting letters. Oh, I'm just longing to hear all his stories. When I can get him in the right mood and he starts, he yarns on for hours, and it's so fascinating, I never want him to stop. So he's to stay at your house? Rather. We'd be fearfully cross with him if he didn't. He's coming to us first, and then he and Mother and I are all going away somewhere for the Easter holidays. It will be such fun. I wish the time would fly quicker. It's only a fortnight to the end of the term now, said Dorothy. I know, but a fortnight is 14 days, my dear. Mother says Uncle David will probably arrive at the end of next week, though she thinks he may come overland from Marseilles. She wants to arrange to go away on the Wednesday before Easter at latest. I don't expect I shall come to school for the last day, perhaps not in the last week at all. Mother can't bear travelling when the trains are crowded, so we may start on the Monday or Tuesday. What place are you going to? I don't know. We're leaving that for Uncle David to decide. It must be delightful, thought Dorothy, to have the anticipation of such a pleasant holiday. Alison was much to be envied, not only for the possession of so desirable an uncle, but because he seemed disposed to spend his time in the company of his niece, and to entertain her with tales of adventure. I don't suppose I shall see him, she said to herself. They won't ask me to Lindenley, but I should like to hear some of the stories about India. Well, luck never comes my way. Nobody's going to take me away from home this Easter. Sometimes when we are railing our hardest at fate, and calling her by opprobrious names, she astonishes us by twisting round her mystic wheel and sending us an unwanted piece of good fortune. Dorothy had often bemoaned the fact that nobody ever asked her away, yet only a week afterwards she received an invitation, and that from a most unexpected quarter. She had always been rather a favourite with Dr. Longton, who had attended her in measles, bronchitis, and the few other ailments in which she had indulged, and also with Mrs. Longton, a kind-hearted, elderly lady, whose daughters were all married and living in Coalminster. On the Saturday before Easter Mrs. Longton called on Miss Sherborne, mentioned that she and the doctor were going to the Dales for a little holiday, and asked if Dorothy might be allowed to accompany them. "We had arranged to take my niece," she explained, "but her mother is unwell, and she cannot leave home at present. We had engaged a bedroom for her at the Hydro, so we shall be delighted if Dorothy will occupy it instead. We are both fond of young people, and it will be a pleasure to have her with us. Would you care to come, my dear?" Dorothy's face was such a beaming advertisement of joy that her instant acquiescence seemed superfluous. Aunt Barbara readily agreed, and in a few minutes the whole plan was discussed and fixed. "Isn't it too lovely?" cried Dorothy, exulting over her invitation when Mrs. Longton had gone. "I've never in my life stayed at a Hydro. And to go to Clevedale, too. I suppose it's splendid." Bertha Warren was at Ringboro last summer, and she raved over it. "Auntie, don't you think for once I'm in luck's way? I believe it's because I bought a swastika at the bazaar, and have worn it ever since, though you told me I was silly to spend my sixpence on it." Aunt Barbara laughed. "I don't believe in charms. I remember I found a horseshoe on the very day I sprained my ankle, long ago, and the biggest cheque I ever received came immediately after I had spilt a whole salt cellar full of salt. But I certainly agree that you're a lucky girl. It's extremely kind of the Longtons to take you. And we're starting next Thursday." "Hip, hip, hooray," sang Dorothy, hopping into the kitchen to tell Martha her good news. It was really a very great event for Dorothy to go from home. Every detail of her preparations and packing was interesting to her. It was delightful to be able to take out the new night dress case, and the best brush and comb, which had been lying for so long a time in her bottom drawer, waiting for an occasion such as this, to put fresh note paper in her writing case, and to replenish the sewing materials in her blue silk housewife. There were great debates over her clothing, for she was still growing at such express speed that any garments which had been put away were hopelessly short, particularly the white dress that was to do duty for evening wear. "I believe it has shrunk," she exclaimed ruefully. "No, it's you who have shot up so fast. I wish the clothes grew with you. I must try if I can lengthen it." Miss Sherborne had clever fingers, and she contrived to make the necessary alterations so skillfully that nobody would have detected them, and Dorothy declared that, far from being spoilt, the dress was improved. "I've bought you some new hair ribbons, and you can wear your chain of green Venetian beads," said Aunt Barbara. "Where are your prayer book and hymn book? And your stockings? Bring them here with the other things, we'll pack in my bedroom." The college broke up for the holidays on the Wednesday before Easter. Allison did not appear at school all that week, so Dorothy supposed that the uncle must have arrived, and that they had gone from home. "Allison doesn't know I'm having a jaunt too," she thought. "We shall be able to compare notes when we meet again." On the longed-for Thursday, Dorothy, feeling very important and grown up, met Dear and Mrs. Longton at the station, and found herself off and away. The trains were crowded and late, but she enjoyed the journey nevertheless. She had seen so little of the world that it was a delight to her to watch the landscape from the carriage windows, and the bustle of the busy station where they changed amused her, however it might distract Dr. Longton, who was anxious about the luggage. Their destination was Ringborough, a beautiful spot in Clevedale much celebrated for its bracing air and its splendid mountain views. The hydropathic establishment where they were to stay was situated on a pine-clad hillside, and its extensive grounds sloped to a turbulent northern river that swirled along, brown with peat from her moors. Dr. Longton, who was an enthusiastic angler, and had come armed with a variety of fishing tackle, looked at the condition of the water with a critical eye as he passed. "Well, when I can't fish I can golf," he remarked. "The links here are among the best in the kingdom. Dorothy, do you feel inclined to act caddy?" "I'd rather carry your baskets of fish," laughed Dorothy. "You little impudence! Do you mean to hint that my catches will prove such a light weight? Just wait and see. I'll make you earn your salt, young lady. Perhaps you'll be staggering under a creel like a New Haven fishwife before you return. Here we are at last. Now, I hope they've really kept the rooms I asked for. I stipulated for a south aspect." The hydropathic, it appeared, was very full, and the doctor, greatly to his dissatisfaction, was not able to have the particular accommodation for which he had written. "We must put up with what we can get, I suppose," he grunted. "At this season everybody swarms out of town for a breath of mountain air and a try at the trout." Dorothy, at any rate, was not disposed to grumble at the little bedroom which fell to her share, though it was on the top story. She liked going up and down in the lift, and her window looked directly out onto the woods at the back. There was a delicious smell of pines in the air, and when she leaned out she could catch a glimpse, round the corner, of a piece of brown river. In the highest spirits she unpacked and changed her dress, and Mrs. Longton came to take her downstairs. The ways of a hydropathic were unknown to Dorothy. It seemed new and strange to her to enter the large public drawing-room, full of people waiting for the dinner gong to sound. She looked round with keen interest at the other visitors. A large party of gentlemen stood near the piano, discussing fishing prospects. Some golfers, collected round the fire, were comparing notes and relating experiences. A few of the ladies were busy with fancy work, and some were reading. Standing by the bookcase, turning over the volumes, was a familiar little figure with a round, rosy face. "By all that's marvelous, it's Allison," gasped Dorothy. The recognition between the two girls was a mutual astonishment. Allison rushed to welcome her friend in great excitement. "Dorothy, is it really you? Oh, how delightful! Mother, Dorothy's actually staying here. Uncle David, this is my very greatest friend. Oh, what a perfectly lovely surprise! When did you come?" "We've been here since Monday." Mrs. Clark greeted Dorothy coldly, but the pleasant-faced, brown-bearded gentleman addressed as Uncle David smiled as he shook hands. "So this is your school chum, Birdie? Well, it's a piece of luck for you that she's turned up here. There'll be high jinks now, I expect." "Rather," declared Allison, with a beaming look. "It's the one thing that will make the holiday complete." Though Mrs. Clark might not share her daughter's enthusiasm to the meeting, she found it impossible to prevent the intimacy between the two girls. She made a struggle at first to keep them apart, but Allison had been spoiled too long not to know how to wheedle her mother and get her own way. "I can't be rude to Dorothy," she pleaded. "It will seem so extraordinary if I mayn't speak to her." "I don't forbid you to speak to her, only there is no need for you to spend your whole time together." "I don't wish you to be on such familiar terms," replied Mrs. Clark. "Nonsense, Cecily," put in Uncle David, interfering on behalf of his niece. "You're quite absurd over Birdie. The poor child must have some young friends. You can't expect her to be content with us middle-aged people. I like this Dorothy, what's her name? She has a bright, taking little face. It can't possibly do Birdie any harm to associate with her. You can't bring up the girl in cotton wool. You coddle her enough on the subject of health, so at least let her enjoy herself in other ways. I'm going fishing tomorrow with Dr. Longton. He's a bluff old Yorkshireman, but he's capital company, and he's a member of the North Riding Anglers Club. He's promised to give me some hints." With her uncle's influence on her side, Allison felt an official seal had been placed on her friendship, and as Mrs. Longton was pleased for Dorothy to have found a companion, the two girls were much together. Ringborough Hydropathic was a favourite resort for Coalminster people, and two other girls from the college happened to be staying there with their families, Hope Lawson and Gabrielle Helm, who was in the lower fifth. Hope did not look particularly pleased to meet her classmates. She gave them a cool little nod, and took no further notice of them. She was much occupied with her own set of friends, and did not seem disposed to trouble herself with her schoolfellows, nor were they anxious to push themselves under her notice. Gabrielle Helm, on the contrary, claimed acquaintance with Dorothy and Allison, and introduced her brothers, Percy and Eric, who attended the Coalminster Boys' College. The young people were keen on golf, and from him Dorothy received her first lessons on the links, laughing very much over her mistakes and false strokes, and enjoying every moment of the time. She had never spent such holidays, or dreamed that they were even possible, and the days did not seem half or a quarter long enough for all the delightful things there were to do in them. "It was good of you to bring me," she said sometimes to Mrs. Longton. "It's a pleasure to see your bright face, my dear," replied her kind chaperone. "You're so rosy, your aunt will hardly know you when you return." "Dorothy is growing quite pretty," said Gabrielle Helm to Alison. "I used to think her rather a scrawny-looking girl, but she's suddenly developed into almost a beauty." "Percy said last night he thought her ripping, and he's a fearful old hard to please." "Yes," said Alison contemplatively, "Dorothy has changed. Of course, her eyes were always lovely, but her face has filled out lately, and she does her hair more becomingly. That's made a difference. And that blue dress suits her. I think she's prettier now than Hope Lawson." "Hope wouldn't allow a hat." "Rather not," laughed Alison. Dorothy was indeed having the time of her life, and very great happiness is often an aid to good looks. Though she found Mrs. Clark rather chilly and distant, she liked Alison's Uncle David immensely. Sometimes the two girls would accompany him and the doctor on a fishing expedition, or a walk through the pine woods, where he proved the pleasantest and most humorous of companions, or, better still, they would catch him in the half-hour before dinner, decoy him into one of the small sitting rooms generally empty at that time in the evening, and then cajole him into telling some of his experiences in the jungle. To Dorothy these Indian stories were thrilling. She was never tired of hearing about tigers and elephants, ruined temples, farkas, coolies, and midnight adventures. "Of course, Uncle David draws the longbow considerably," laughed Alison. "He expects one to take 10% discount off all his travelers' yarns. But they are very fascinating, even if they are not true. He likes you, because you're a good listener. Dorothy, what shall we do without you when the holiday's over?" "Don't speak of it. I'm living in the present from hour to hour," declared Dorothy.